Peace. So, in the scriptures, the Most High refers to summer and winter as houses, and about his borders and his locations being between these houses. Alright, so when we look at what the scriptures refer to as the summer house and the winter house, when we look at these tropics and these measures and how this is important to the foundation of the Most High's order, when we look at the spring, the summer, fall, and winter, and how these mythos, heaven and earth, and the shamans and these intercessors who were the first to understand these signs and orders and develop the priesthood. So when you look at Shamu, a harvest, and then the flooding season, when you look at one of the ancient calendars, right, which includes the season of Paret, the planting season. Now, each one of these 3 seasons is 120 days, 120 degrees. And when you look at the degrees and the deacons and the measures, each day was a decimal of 1.1. All right. So you look at the calculation of how these seasons were placed in threes, right? It was 3 seasons of 120 days. So this is why each one of these marks here for these part of these 3 triangles, which makes this peace sign, as you see. We look at tropics, tripod, right? 3 is key. So when you look at 3 and 120, and these 3 seasons that annually observe the earth, right? This is when we look here. In September, you have the Day of Atonement. So the deacons. So the deacons, when you're looking at these 360 days are calendar every 10 days. Right, so when you look at this 10 and these tenths and the significance of the 10th, whether it's the 10th of September in the beginning of the atonement, giving a 10th, a tithe, and what have you, the 10th is significant. So when we look at the measure of time and how these particular times are mapped out, right? So we see here, if you can see on this map that's here, shit, I can't see. Let me try to get off this thing. So if you see this map right here, it says at the top it mentions Tammuz, Cancer, right, and Sartan. So when you look at Tammuz, this is the time of 0 degrees, right, to 30 degrees, which is significant with the Cancer. Good morning. Get it from peace, Shalom, King, Shalom, King, Shalom. Peace be with you as well. So yeah, I'm just I'm just sharing this information because just noticing what some may look as contradicting in all the different systems. They're actually teaching the same creation, the same stories, the same order. Europeans or European ideology has divided and made paths and disciplines and orders, religious rites and all this other different things that have gotten away from the function and the actual purpose of these particular orders, And so it's the design of the earth and harmonics and harmony and everything is within this order and this perfection. So this perfection in design is what forms matter, or controls matter, which makes, one able to manipulate matter, knowing matter, you know what I'm saying? And the particles within that matter. And so this is why we see us get manipulated and truth get manipulated when you look at the core of things and the origin of things and time and things in their perfect order, things become simple and not as complex as man often tries to make things. So, just looking at the Babylonian calendar, the Gregorian calendar, some may say that these calendars are off, and that is true. But the mythology behind, even when you look at July and the month of August, these months were interjected into the calendar, but the observation or the science of how one observes time or calculates time is still used within the calendar system of the Gregorian calendar. So, but they design it in a way so that way certain days remain at certain times for commerce, and so civilizations that they needed to form calendars, they had to form calendars, and they had to form order in order for civilizations to function. So this is why every civilization we can trace the orders and the teachings and find out what a civilization used and how they took the signs of nature to form their civil orders relating to the systems in the heavens. So when we look at this current time of Leo, which is the month of Av, which is a measure of 30 degrees west to 60 degrees west. This is the region we'll see in Greenland, even in Brazil, to the Amazon region, and parts of the eastern border of the North American continent, into regions, the Virgin Islands, right before a lot of these regions, right before the 60 degrees west, which is where the Virgo constellation, near the Virgin Islands. So if you look at, it says the climax of the zodiac sign Virgo is 109 degrees east, which is geographically the Far East. So this, when you look at the Far East in Asia, and why the Americas got associated with Asia, Cuba, and some of these islands were speculated by some of these first voyagers to be Japan and different regions, you have to understand what the measure of the hemisphere, right? Only half gives you the information for the whole. So the mirroring or the mirroring of these lands, such as the East Indies and West Indies, these are gates. So when you look at the gate to this land, the West Gate, West Indies, and then there's an East Indies, it's because this land of America is within the tropics. So being between these tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, the winter and summer and winter house, and the borders of the Americas, this ancient land, when you look at the Far East, it says Demo Europeans made 180 degrees meridian, the international date line. Now, this international date line is where the winter solstice is, where the sun dies for the 3 days, 21st of December, and the mythology, and then around Christmas, and 3 days and 3 nights, the Southern Cross. So when you look at the international date line, but when you look at time, the ancients used high noon to calculate time. And so since they use high noon to calculate their time, midnight, the midnight hour, was essential. So when you look at this pole that goes where Mexico is, in this region of the true east, and the high noon, or in the equinox, and where the Ecuador, in these lands of the Mayan, Guatemalan area, where you'll find many observatories and ruined temples that are placed there to map out the soul, the sun, the soul's crossing. And so these regions of America became associated as being known as the land of the dead because this West End gate coming through the West Indies through 30 degrees, through the mouth of the Sphinx, Ariel, the mouth of the lion, the Leo, into these regions of the, of the Atlantic. This is where the sun died. So people wanted to be buried in the land where the sun died so that they can die with the sun or rise with the sun. So when you look at these different mythologies of the ancients and their texts, you have to understand where they brought them to bury them according to have them rise with the sun or die with them in the mother's bosom. Right? And we understand Eve in the evening, and these lands of the Americas, these are the lands of the evening when the new sun is in the eastern land. We are protected in the evening and the night and the darkness. So the mother, when you look at Tamari and the land of the flood, the Nile flood, this particular time, this annual particular time of the flood, when you look at these regions, especially in the Gulf, what takes place during after the summer, going into the fall, when we have a lot of these rains and floods that take place, and storms, or what have you, during these particular times. So, these things, the flood, and these particular time periods, and how they were measuring each day, and each measure is essential. I wanted to blow this up. I can't see it. I can't see it there. So when you look at the lands of America, and from 30 degrees west, right, when we look at Greenland all the way to 150 degrees west, this land of darkness, this land, when you look at from Cancer all the way into Scorpio, into this particular time, is what keeps this land in these mythological significance with the dead in the northern skies in the northern hemisphere. Because during this particular time of the summer, this is when the sun comes into this northern tropic before the fall. And then it comes back to the equatorial range. So this is significant, especially for these ancients who you'll see very significance of these deacons, which are, 10 and 10. So when you look at December, and the month of December is looked at as 12, right? But it's actually 10 in linguistics. So you understand how these calendars been interjected. These calendars have been interjected, right? We look at decans in December. We look at this as 12, but you have to understand the long 120, versus when you look at the decimal and the cap of man being 120. These things play a significance in the geometrics and the measures
look at this time with Shamu
for the different lands.
It says it's the opener of the year. Understand that
And
during this time,
for the lunar being only 360 days, or a measure of just under 360 days, that still has to be measured, because it could be 361, it could be 362, So this is why the 13th month was created, and this 13th month was created in order to measure the soul, the sun, to know the proper time, proper alignment, right? So every 4 years, every 1,460 days, this is why today Ethiopia's calendar is 10 years behind our current calendar. So the Sahedral time and this 13th month and the creation of the 13th month and the current Gregorian calendar are all connected.
This time of Shamu, and it says it's the opener of the year. Understand that during this time, when I was saying the time of Leo is the opening or the mouth into.
So when we look at this, this is what I'm saying. When you can measure, right? So you can measure being in the north or being in a certain subtropic. You have to take into account to where one is on the earth, right? So if one is north or in the northern tropic, when they see the sunset, you know what I'm saying, depending on where they are, they're not going to necessarily get these degrees, right? They're not going to be able to measure these things. So this is why location is essential. So when you look at the reasons for the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, and where Mexico is, especially in these regions, it's easier to get a better measure when you're within this circle of the tropics, because you have the ability to observe. You know what I'm saying? Like right now during this time, it being in the north, it's even at what they call the midnight sun. If you check this out, it's called the midnight sun, right? And the thing about the midnight sun is that the sun is, even though when it sets, it's still in the tropic. It's still within this region on the horizon. So the measures of sunset and sunrise and the civil twilight, which is 0 to 6 degrees, these different measures are significant for the hours and the windows of time that one has to measure time. So in the 18 degrees, one has an hour is 90 minutes. So that way you can count on the hand. You see what I'm saying? But if you do the nautical, that's 12 hours of 60 minutes. You see what I'm saying? So the calculations, when you do the different measures, give you different windows of measure. So 18 degrees gives you a 90-minute window. You know what I'm saying? So the nautical gives you a 60-minute window, 12 60-minute windows from sunrise to sunset. So then these things are seen because of the sun's positioning as it goes through tropic to tropic, which marks, this is how time is marked. So this is why the summer, the sun is in this northern tropic, it's hotter in these regions where you see the red area, the polar Arctic circle in these regions. Some of these glacier caps melt, which also cause flood issues, because the runoff then runs off into these regions, especially in the Rockies. And then you have the rains come in the fall. So understand how these times is calculated. The seasons is calculated. You know, again, just got bird seats out here. You don't have no shoes. And so these ancient travelers and used to use these. When we look at the Thule in the Reed boat, you understand that the red. When we look at the Thule in the Reed boat, you understand that the. So this is why the processions, the marches, when you look at these things are in reference to the sun and how the sun goes through its highway annually. You know what I'm saying? The animals also follow the sun. The whales, the Tamis, the great whales, they
cap.
This is how.
So you understand when the sun is at 90 degrees.
So Leo, in this particular time of the Leo, and how the seas and the different winds, you know what I'm saying, were essential. As you see here, where the winds bring you down into. So before the Panama Canal was available, one would have to go all the way around the Horn of South Africa to come into the Pacific. So the Andes and the Rockies for the North American continent and the Andes in the South were a protection to the Pacific, because these mountain ranges and the seas is what protected them on the Pacific side of these lands for the longest, till it wasn't until 100 and 200 years ago that a lot of these lands have officially been colonized, you know what I'm saying, because of these mountain ranges. It made it difficult because the seas, so the Panama Canal was essential. It allowed for them to travel, bring their families from the Eastern Hemisphere into the Americas and part of colonizing the land. And so, the wind patterns, and coming into the mouth of Leo. So you look at under the sea, and coming into this mouth of Leo, and the solar. This is how the ancients moved. This is how we have.
The Egyptians have traveled to South America.
If someone could prove that
we know for sure that this Reed style boat and this crescent moon style was possible for. So check this out: the cocaine mummies, and make the connection between the two Egypts. When you look at Thor-Hidro and the Reed boat, when you look at these cocaine mummies, taking into account that Thor-Hidro, he developed a Reed style boat the same way that. So there was in fact two Egypts. When we look at the ancient Akim and the ancient Red Mound, so when you look at the mystery of the cocaine mummies, understand Thor-Hidro, the Reed style boat, Peru, Lake Titicaca, and if you look at this book, Lost Tribe and Promised Lands, you'll see key facts matching up with. So when you look at the mystery of the cocaine mummies, understand Thor-Hidro, the Reed style boat, Peru, Lake Titicaca, and the trans-Pacific and transatlantic trade that had been going on pre-Diluvian.
So, you know what I'm saying, when we look at the ancient travels, and we can follow the pyramid texts, and it will direct us to these land regions, and to get into these wind patterns, and to these ancient navigational channels that would allow for circumnavigation. So it wasn't until around the time of the Age of Discovery that Europeans got knowledge of this, to be able to come into what they called the New World. And so, don't mess the house up. Don't mess it up, baby. So, you see the kitty?
I don't see it.
That became significant for when you look at how lands today, nations are entrapped to their territories or boundaries, and the connections with the locations, number, and coordinates, geometrics, have a celestial significance, especially when you look at the areas of the Tropic of Cancer all the way up into the regions of where we find the Taurus, around the Masons and builders around the 33 degrees east, and what have you. So it's just interesting to see how the Earth is geometrically connected with sound and the perfection of the actual order that we speak of. And all of these things we can search and get knowledge of to know how to restore the earth's body, or understand when the earth is going to restore itself in its time and its seasons, and understand when it was going to be a famine or storms, you know what I'm saying, and when storage, and when one should store, and when one should, you know what I'm saying, give, burn, destroy. All of these things are shown through the heavens. Hey, baby.
No, wait.
Huh?
I'm going to eat.
You gonna eat it?
Really the quote-unquote promised land. This is really the quote-unquote heart of civilization. This is really what you might call Northwest Africa. That's why, and I say that to people so they can stop saying I'm going back to Africa and understand that they're in it.
This is the Garden of Eden.
It's the Garden of Eden.
That's what they had in Columbus's journal that they arrived.
Absolutely.
Eden.
So what has happened is absolute lies.
Okay, honey.
That's right. And the land of milk and honey is another terminology. So these things are important because as you're doing studies and you read books, well, however old they may be or whatever like that, and if it says the land of milk and honey, you need to know they're talking about the North American continent. If you don't know that, then you miss it. And that's part of our problem. That part of our problem is the miseducation.
Look at the pole star, as it's called the majority of the time, and the jackal or Anubis. When you look at when we look at commercialism, capitalism, and the taking over of resources, minerals, like the law and the order that we have knowledge of is needed. The earth needs true judgment. The earth needs true ambassadors to facilitate the judgment, to facilitate the necessary balance of the earth. Stop. Peace.